So before we get started on talking about wellness, I just have a couple caveats. First, I would really like this to be interactive. That was a real big challenge for me when I found out that this was only 30 minutes. I was like, whew, okay, how do I be an interactive human and give information in 30 minutes? That's a tall order. So I'm gonna do my best. My goal is not to talk at all of you because I am a self-identified social constructivist and feminist. And so I really don't think that you're going to create any kind of meaning about wellness and course design by me just talking at you. I also don't think that my experience as a counselor educator is going to be easily transferable to what everybody in this room and or Zoom is doing, because I need to own my context. In counselor ed, the biggest class size I have is 24. Typically my specific courses that I teach have about 12, since I'm predominantly teaching clinical based classes. And so when I'm talking about things, I'm talking about, I have 12 students. I can take all the time in the world to do check-ins and to talk about integrated information. Also, I work in counseling, so wellness is really easy to integrate into my course content. So I want to own that context, knowing that that might not be true for everyone. I know that some people have classes that have 200 people in them. I know that it might be a lot harder to be how do you integrate wellness when I teach algebra? That's a really great question. So hopefully some of the things that I'm going to talk about will be transferable, relatable, but also, again, I'm hoping that we can create more shared meaning, because I know that my experience is not everybody else's experience. The other caveat that I have is that me standing at this podium feels really inauthentic when I'm talking about being a social constructivist. I'm also talking about being a counselor educator, but I want people in our Zoom room to also be able to see me. So I just want to own how inauthentic this feels. I would rather be sitting on the table with all of you having this discussion. And then my very last caveat for those of you in person, but also those of you in Zoom, I'm actually visually impaired, so I'm legally blind. So it would be a lot more helpful if anybody has questions to just shout them out. I'm not going to be offended if there's interruptions or overtalk. I'm just going to set that norm right now in this presentation, that anybody here in person or via Zoom, you just say it out loud. If you have a question, if you have a comment, I'm ready for that. Okay, so let's get started. That feels good. All right, so today in this really brief 30 minutes, I'd like to define wellness for everyone, so that way we have an operational shared definition of what that means. I'd also like to summarize some of the similarities and differences between wellness and well-being, because those are not two interchangeable terms, though often in our society they are used interchangeably. I'd like to introduce one wellness model. If I had time, I would introduce two, because the one I am introducing is much more topical. Probably most of you have even already seen the wellness wheel. It's not my personal favorite, but it is really user-friendly, and you don't have to have a counseling background. You don't have to do a lot of research. I think students really respond well to it, so that's what I chose to talk about today. And then I'd also like to explore ways to incorporate wellness into courses. I have some ideas, but again, I'm hoping to socially construct some other ways. So before I actually tell you the operational definition of wellness, I just like all of you here and in Zoom to just yell out what comes to mind when you think of wellness. It can be anything.
Well, it's defined by the person.
Okay, so individual.
And I would say balance, maybe.
Balance, individualized.
Finding ways to take care of yourself.
Okay, finding ways to take care of yourself, so self-care practices.
I think there's a multifaceted element, so physical, mental, there's more than one thing.
Yeah, multifaceted. Any other things from anyone here or in Zoom? All right, well, I think you all hit the key points, which makes sense, because wellness isn't necessarily an overly complicated thing to talk about, especially when we're just talking about it as a really broad concept. So, according to the Global Wellness Institute, wellness is the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. So when you think about this, it is a holistic thing. So we're looking at a person as a holistic being who has multiple dimensions. We're also looking at this being a really specific, active choice in which you're engaging in wellness. So wellness is not passive or static. So that means that it's not just something that happens to people like me existing in the world. Wellness isn't just going to like happen to me. I have to do something. I have to take an active role in that. So I have to have some kind of intention behind what I would like my wellness to look like. It's also holistic. So again, has multiple dimensions. It's also multidimensional. And there are different dimensions that we'll talk about in a minute. And it also is a really individual journey. What wellness means or looks like to my life is probably not like the same as everybody here. Maybe there might be some similar elements, but it's not going to be identical. And maybe it won't even have similarities. So just to like give you some context to this on what wellness looks like in my own personal life, because I think that that's important, not just for this, but also important in what I'll talk about in how we can create wellness in our course design. Instead of New Year's resolutions, every year I set an intention. So this year for 2022, my intention is mind, body, spirit. So it really is rooted in like a wellness-based approach to life this year. So part of that for me is that I actually downloaded this like daily habit tracker app. I've never done that before, but I was like, why not? This sounds great. And so I picked areas of my life that I'm not like traditionally doing very well in, and some areas that I have never even tried things before. Just to kind of push myself slightly outside of my comfort zone and try some new things. So in my app, I have to have some kind of movement every single day. I don't set any kind of confines around myself because I think sometimes that gets really overwhelming when you're suddenly like, okay, I'm gonna do these 800 things and I'm gonna do them for exactly 1 hour every single day. Like I would just be setting myself up for failure. So really my goal is like move your body. When I decided to do this, I was like, okay, I can't be trusted to like move my body that much. So I bought one of those like little under the desk pedalers. 100% when I've like had a bad day, I'm like, move my body, this is stupid. I watch TV and just pedal, right? Because I'm always gonna make time to watch TV. So I still do this like passive form of exercise because I still am moving my body. So I do that. And I don't set any kind of time constraints for it. Like, I just hope that I do it. I also choose to read for leisure every single day. Again, no time limit. Sometimes I only make it through a paragraph before I fall asleep, like with my book. And like, but that's fine. It's the intention. Like I made the effort. And sometimes like yesterday, I probably read for 3 hours. But the point is I'm reading for leisure, something that I like to do that helps me emotionally. I journal at least twice a week. I'm a journaler. Surprise, counselors love journaling. I don't expect everybody in this room to love journaling. I also meditate every single day. That's something new. Prior to this, I had never really dedicated myself to the meditation process. I'm still not a huge fan. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of focus, it takes a lot of skill. But I will say, now that I've been doing it every day for 5 months, it really does work. Darn all those people saying mindfulness works. It really does work. I feel a lot better now that I've been meditating. Again, no time constraints on that. Sometimes I only do it for 5 minutes. Sometimes I do it for 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes is about my max. I don't have enough like stamina built up quite yet. And then the last thing is drinking water. I am really bad at drinking water. So I have the goal of every day to at least drink just 16 ounces of regular old water. So those are some of the ways that I'm looking at wellness. So I'm looking at it from my emotional health, my psychological, my physical, and my spiritual. Those are my key areas in which I'm trying to focus on, just to give you an idea. So what is the difference between wellness and something like well-being or happiness? Great question that nobody actually asked, but maybe you were wondering. So some of this is a little bit repetitive when I introduced the concept of wellness, but wellness is really intention, action, and it's activity-based. So these are things that you're like physically doing, physically engaging in some kind of way. Whereas when you're looking at well-being or happiness, that's more of a perception of a state of mind. So where are you in terms of just your like overall mood or your perception of how things are going? Wellness predominantly focuses on the physical dimension, whereas well-being and happiness focuses predominantly on more of a mental and emotional dimension. So you can see how they might have some overlap here, because if we're looking at wellness as holistic, The practice of wellness might be more focused on physical, but like the construct of well-being is more focused on that mental or emotional dimension of wellness. So well-being is kind of like a component of wellness. Wellness is associated with a healthy lifestyle and choices, whereas well-being and happiness is associated more with how we feel or how we sense our overall satisfaction or fulfillment in life. So do you feel satisfied, rewarded, fulfilled with what you're doing, or do you maybe feel more like anxious, depressed, stressed out? Like, what does that look like? Wellness can also be utilized in measuring individual or community opportunities. So like when we're looking at wellness, I could give everybody in here a wellness assessment that could both evaluate your individual overall wellness, but also we could talk about we as an NDSU group of people, what our wellness is. Whereas when we're looking at well-being, it's primarily utilized in a way of your like individual welfare. Are there any questions about the differences between wellness and well-being? So here is the wellness wheel. This is one of the most common and popular wellness models that you can find. This is often the one that is taught in K through 12 schools, as well as just kind of general distribution. It's an interdependent model developed by Sweeney and Whitmer in the 80s. Originally, it had 12 dimensions. However, over time, I think part of that is kind of like versatility, but also with further research on the wellness model, they found that some of them overlap pretty extensively. So now you see more of a 6 to 8 dimensional model versus that original 12 dimension. So the first dimension is physical. So this recognizes the need for regular physical activity and learning about diet and nutrition. Again, this doesn't have to mean that you have to commit yourself to 60 minutes of exercise 5 days a week. Like this could be taking the stairs instead of an elevator. This could be doing chair yoga. Like some of this has to keep into context your own physical abilities. But what does that look like to just like move your body in some kind of way? What does it look like for you to have a diet that like nourishes your body and like keeps you functioning at your optimal ability to function? This next one, you'll see it named different things. Sometimes it's mental, intellectual, or psychological, but they all mean the same thing. So this recognizes one's creative and stimulating mental abilities. So thinking about like learning really falls under the mental, but also so can like creative engagements. So like trying a new hobby could be something that is like mentally or intellectually stimulating. Doing like a Sudoku puzzle or some other form of puzzle like that can be mentally or intellectually stimulating. Emotional, this recognizes the awareness and acceptance of one's feelings. So this is where counselors predominantly spend their time, is all up in emotions. So thinking about like, hey, what are you maybe like holding on to today? Like now that your day is over, maybe there was like a situation where you're still kind of like thinking about it and have some kind of unspoken or unexpressed emotion that you're holding on to in that. Or maybe you're having a difficult time feeling certain feelings, but looking at this through an emotional lens. Spiritual, this recognizes our search for meaning and purpose in life. Social, encourages contributing to one's environment and community and emphasizes interdependence between others and communities. So this is all about like our ability to engage with other people and our connection to people, whether that be in our own individual circles, whether that be in our community or on a bigger scale. But like, what does our actual connectedness look like? And how are we fostering connections? And the last formal one in this actual wheel is environmental. So this recognizes, that got cut off, how we engage with our environment. So this could mean more than one thing. So environment could mean like our physical environment. So an example of that of like where we're at currently positioned. How are we engaging with our like physical surroundings right now? This also can mean a bigger scale of what does it look like for us to engage with our environment in terms of like nature or how we're taking care of the planet. So it has multiple kind of meanings depending on the context of which you are presenting it in. For the purpose of this, let's talk about the environmental in terms of like our classrooms that we're creating, whether that be via online, hybrid, or in person, but like the physical location of which we're holding our classes. So as I mentioned, some additional models will include 2 additional dimensions that are not listed on this more traditional wellness wheel, and that includes occupational. Well, apparently I only listed one. Occupational, which is about our personal satisfaction and enrichment in one's life. Any questions or comments on the wellness wheel?
You know, I'm surprised that sexual isn't up there.
It was one of the original 12.
Yeah.
I think now, probably fairly or unfairly, you could lump that in with social.
Okay.
And maybe part of that, like, I think if we're thinking about what we as a society know about people's sexuality is that some people are asexual. So some people would argue that that's not necessarily like an innate human basic need or an area in which all people engage in. But affectional is like all people have some level of affection towards other people. That was really counselory. I'm sorry. I can't turn it off sometimes.
It's good.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so I won't go over any of these, but I just wanted to include some examples. I will ensure that in some shape or form, you have access to this PowerPoint, whether that be me emailing it, you emailing me. I will for sure give it to Odal, so that way if they have access to distribute this, you'll have access to it. But I just put on here a few examples of assessing wellness in case you are interested in doing that for yourself, giving that to students, incorporating it in a class. This by no means is an exhaustive list of examples. There are so many examples of wellness assessments and self-care assessments, which sometimes are interchangeably used. And they often are based off of that wellness wheel. So typically they are based off of the 8 dimensions, sometimes only 6 dimensions. And they're usually like checklists, which say like under emotional, it might say things like expressing my emotions, journaling, talking with friends, and it usually gives the option for people to rate themselves. And then at the end, it kind of scores it to give you an idea of which areas you might be needing to put a little bit more time and energy into versus areas where maybe you're doing pretty good in your overall holistic wellness. So these are on here for people to just like take a look at their own convenience. But here's like what we all came here for is ways to incorporate wellness in courses. So I divided into 3 sections. First, thinking about the actual course design, so creating that syllabus. I think it's really important for instructors to include available student resources and support wellness. So all of us have some kind of statement in our syllabi about veterans, about disability services, but I would imagine that the grand majority of us don't actually include like access to the counseling center or what the wellness center has to offer students. And so being able to have those clauses actually in our syllabi to say, hey, if you're struggling with like any kind of emotional, mental health, if you're just like struggling with relationships, you can go to the NDSU Counseling Center for free. Here's the information. I think that that's really helpful. Also highlighting the WellTrack app, which is something that NDSU through the CARE Act now has. It's for all students, faculty, and staff. So anyone on NDSU's campus has access to it, but it's basically a self-directed counseling app. So encouraging students to download that if they're maybe not wanting to actually go talk to somebody, but again, highlighting it in the syllabus that this is an option, and then highlighting them. I also think it's helpful to, in your syllabus, include a statement on wellness. Like tell students where you stand on wellness. Like what does that mean? What level of importance is that to you? Maybe you can include some information on how you're practicing wellness to give them an idea that you're not just like giving rhetoric to them of like, this is another thing you should do, but like, hey, I'm also a human and I also struggle sometimes. And this is what my wellness looks like. I think you can also incorporate different assignments that focus on wellness. And this might look different, again, based on of your individual program area and class size, but maybe you have them create some kind of wellness plan that they submit to you and that they're supposed to engage with over the semester. And at the end, maybe they submit some kind of report, whatever that means to all of you, telling them like how that went or how effective or ineffective it was, what they might change. If you have the luxury of like written assignments, you can have them write some kind of reflection paper that focuses on a topic of wellness. You could have them specifically, and you would need to talk to some of these entities, but you could include assignments where they're getting more immersed in NDSU resources. So maybe they have to take a tour of the wellness center. Maybe they have to go speak with somebody at the counseling center. But think about ways that you can maybe tack on wellness into some of your assignments. Some in-class ideas, these ones were a lot easier to brainstorm for me, but including wellness presentations or trainings in your class. So this could be having the NDSU Counseling Center come in for 5 to 10 minutes and just tell students about what they're offering and really normalize that people are utilizing these services. It could be having someone from student health come in and talk about the plethora of services that they offer. Like, I didn't know until this last August that they have a dirty mail program in which they like mail condoms and contraception to students for free. And I was like, how did I not know about this? I mean, it's a little different at the graduate level because my graduate students mostly all typically have access to that. But I remember being 18 and not having like any kind of reference to like where to buy condoms or like that shame of like, oh gosh, I'm buying condoms, I know I'm having sex. Like, ooh. So I just thought that that was a really great service that NDSU is providing, but like I had no idea as a faculty that that was even an option. So having people come in, this could also be you yourself looking online for different presentations and trainings that might be more focused on wellness in your like in your content area. So in the summer for the last 2 years, I went to the REU program and talked about wellness in terms of research. So you can really tailor this to really specific things, but including those, whether that be in your actual lectures or just things that are available to them outside of class that you'd like to give them resources, that's up to you. Starting class with some kind of brief check-in discussion about wellness or like some kind of like exercise in which they practice. So this is one of those ones that might look different. So again, for me, I usually have about 12 students in my class. So for me, in my practicum sections and my internship sections, I tend to start off class with what is a high of the last week and what is a low. And so we all take turns and go over that, just so that way we get a sense as a culture together where people are at. Like if you had a really bad week, you're probably not really going to bring your best A game into that like space. And so now we all kind of have an idea of where you're at mentally. I mean, if you have 200 people, that might not be something where you're doing where you can have everybody do that, but maybe you're using some kind of like clickers or a Mentimeter or poll where people can at least like see in a visual way of like where the majority of people are. And it would take a lot less time to be doing some kind of check-in like that, but still taking the time to see where people are at. Previously, I don't do this as much anymore, but in prac, I would start off every class with some kind of exercise. So like, I might spend the first 5 minutes introducing a new breathing exercise. So I talk about it and then I have them all do it and then just briefly kind of debrief about what it was like to do that. Sometimes if we're like talking about something really tense, my students laughed at me this semester because I actually did this. We were talking about some tense stuff and we were like, the conversation was ending and I said, okay, we have to transition now. I was like, so everybody get up and like shake it out. And I was like, come on, shake it, shake it, shake it. And they're all looking at me like, what is this woman doing? By hindsight, I found out like a month later, then they were doing it with their clients. And I was like, look at you all being resistant and learning. Okay. So like, that's a really easy way to get things kind of moving for longer classes. So we teach in 3-hour blocks. In the summer, we teach in 5-hour blocks. But when you're taking breaks, find a way to focus on wellness. So that might be playing music. It could be intentionally having students stretch for a couple minutes before they go and like use the restroom and take care of themselves. But thinking about ways that you can use those breaks to infuse wellness into your classroom. Addressing real world issues and events that are happening on campus in the community, nationally, globally, because our students don't exist in vacuums, like our classrooms aren't in vacuums. And so if there's something really big going on, giving space for students to have time to process that can be really helpful and really stimulate that wellness instead of having them try to compartmentalize things. Be a role model. So again, talk about your own wellness journey, talk about your own wellness practices. That's why I started this off by telling you all about like, hey, here's where I'm currently at with my wellness. Because if we're not talking about it, they're not really knowing what importance that has. I think with my students, it's really helpful because I also talk about how like I'm kind of sucky at it sometimes, right? Like I'm not a perfect human, and there are definitely days where my wellness just like sucks and I feel it. And so I talk about that sometimes too. Like I go to a counselor. I don't necessarily share students like, here's what I talk about in my counseling sessions, but I do tell them to normalize, like I go to counseling and hopefully you think I'm a pretty well-adjusted human. So like you don't have to be somebody who is like, has this unmanageable life or is like really, really struggling to not get help and to not support yourself. So I do try to talk to them about the fact that like I go to a counselor just to normalize that and model it. Outside of class, like be flexible with homework submissions. So maybe you can have that homework assignment, whatever it is, submitted in multiple ways. Like maybe they could write a paper, maybe they could record a 5-minute video talking about that thing. Maybe they're allowed to do some kind of like creative project that's based on how they learned the content, just to help incorporate some of those areas of wellness. Like that might help somebody's creative state. So that emotional state, if they have the space to do that, or maybe their own intellectual space can be stimulated a little bit more. Adjusting deadlines to promote better sleep hygiene. So instead of that like midnight deadline, maybe consider like 10 p.m. So that way they're not staying up until that last minute, because there's always at least one student who pushes that deadline. And then that means that they're probably not getting the sleep that they need that night. So considering when you're having deadlines, also considering extra credit or makeup points, if that's something that makes sense in the context of your class, that might be more health or wellness related. So having them attend some kind of event that the campus is holding, that like in the fall, we had, oh gosh, what was his name? It's going to come to me, but it's not going to come to me fast enough. But it was about suicide. So it was the man who attempted suicide on the Golden Gate Bridge. Like that would be a really great event. That might be like extra credit or kind of a makeup assignment for students to be getting engaged with. So just some ideas that I have, and then I'm like out of time already. But let me go back. Also on my slide, I just have a list of some of the NDSU resources in case you didn't know about them. And I also put a link that has a link to all of the NDSU resources that are listed on the NDSU website, and then links to those individual things if you'd like to see what they have to offer. All right, that was much less interactive than I thought it was. 30 minutes did not do me well. But are there any last minute questions or takeaways, thoughts?
I have a question about the humanizing component,
Yeah.
which I am absolutely a fan of. I think it's really valuable. I also think about how students say often they're intimidated by professors, so value to it. The part that I wonder about is I feel like sometimes our humanizing is we're like, oh, we are also overwhelmed, or we're really busy, we're juggling a lot. And
Yes.
I worry through research that I do with students that sometimes they take that message as, I don't want to bother this person.
Oh, yes.
Because they have a lot going on.
Yes.
Like we just hear that again and again, like I'm not going to office hours, or I'm not sending email because this person talks in class about how they're dealing with a lot. So do you have any tips for when sharing your like wellness, being a role model? Like how can you do that in a way that doesn't make students feel like they shouldn't come and seek support from you, academic or otherwise?
Yes, no, this is a real thing. Like I will never tell my students, like this is just a personal rule of myself. I will never tell my students that I'm busy, because I don't want them to get the message that I think that they're a burden, because I will always make time for a student, no matter what my life looks like. So oftentimes I'll be really specific. Like if a student asks me, hey, how are you? I'll give an authentic answer of like, oh, well, I'm kind of stressed because I have a deadline today, but I also knew about this deadline for the last 6 months. So that's just kind of self-induced. So I just really try to like give them specific, instead of saying like, well, here's the litany of 100 things that I have going on. I'll just tailor it to like one really specific thing. And I think that that's pretty helpful. I mean, at the end of the day, I think students know we're busy. Like no matter how hard I try to not communicate that I'm busy, like I have students who come and say, I know you're really busy. I'm like, oh, I'm never too busy for you. Come on in. And I think the more you do that, the more they kind of understand like, oh, like they are busy, and instead of but. Sure.
Thank you.
I'll just say, Jessica, even though we didn't talk a lot to you, which is fine, it was like 30 minutes, I was doing a lot of talk in my head. So like it was very,
Hey, good social construction, having an individual,
Interaction.
like not my ideal, but it works.
great information.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all.